Hey everyone, welcome to Crime Family. I'm AJ, your co-host, and I'm here with Stephanie and Katie, my sisters and fellow co-hosts, like always. And for today's episode, we are here to talk about the Menendez Brothers case, which is a pretty high-profile case, and I'm assuming if you follow true crime or you listen to a lot of true crime, you probably know a lot about this case already. But we're here to talk about it and all of the recent updates that happened, late 2024, and the new Netflix documentary that came out called The Menendez Brothers, which we recently have watched. And so we have a lot of thoughts and opinions about it. So we're going to be talking about that as well. So to start off the episode, we are going to just do like a quick rundown of the basics of the case. So in case it's not fresh on your mind or maybe you don't know much about it, at least you'll be able to follow our conversation a little bit better if you know a little bit more about the basics. But we're not going to be doing like a deep dive into the very specifics of the trial or the specifics of the evidence and all of that stuff. There are lots of other podcasts out there that have already done that and have done that pretty well. So we're here to just talk about our thoughts on the case and all these updates and things like that. So yeah, I guess I wanted to start out by asking, what you, Katie and Steph, what your knowledge about the case was, like prior to watching the documentary, like prior to the last, whatever, 3-4 months when it was kind of in the news again.
Honestly, before I saw the new documentary and the new new information that came out, I actually kind of didn't really forget, but I kind of I didn't forget about the case, but I kind of just forgot what kind of went on. So I'm kind of glad that I did rewatched some of the stuff and looked up it, because I remember talking about it back in their second, maybe third season. And I remember being really shocked about the whole thing, but now that we were talking about it again, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened. Um so yeah, what I'm trying to say, I really enjoyed the documentary. There's some things that I think there's some things that I didn't like about it, but most part I liked it. But I'm kind of glad that I got to rewatch it, and now that it's fresh in my mind.
Yeah, for me, I didn't really know that much about it because this is like an older case. It's happened in the 1989 or something, and or 90, yeah, the 90s. And I mean, and then when it first came back, then it came back out into the media because of these documentaries that came out and some things that the Menendez brothers were doing behind bars, like their habeas corpus, which we'll get into. And so what I first watched was the documentary called, not even really a documentary, just a show about them called Monsters on Netflix, which is like a lot is fabricated. And when you watch that, you're just like, it really makes you not be on their side. Like it shows them as this arrogant pieces of shit, and you're like, fuck these guys. So that was my opinion kind of about it because of that, even though it shouldn't have been. But anyway, going back and doing the actual research and watching the actual documentary and the actual court trials, my opinion has changed a bit. So it was interesting to kind of go through all that and be like, okay, it's actually not how it was portrayed in that show. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I was gonna say I chose not to watch the Netflix the Monsters one because I didn't want to have that, Katie, have that in my mind of if they're monsters and the fabrication. I didn't want to have that in my mind and then watch the real true documentary. So maybe after all this, I might go back and watch that just because.
Yeah. See, I had watched that before we kind of decided to do this as an episode. And so I wasn't really thinking oh, it's going to taint my opinion because I'm just watching a show. But it really does make you really think that you hate them. I mean, you still could based on what actually happened. But anyway, yeah, it's definitely important, I think, that you didn't watch it beforehand.
Yeah, I think it was like Ryan Murphy. I think it's like a Ryan Murphy show who does a lot of shows, and we'll get into that. And I haven't seen that either, like the Monsters one, and probably won't. But yeah, we'll get into that sort of stuff. And I guess you two have both reminded me, we talked about it last week, or when we were planning what we were going to do for this episode. You you had mentioned that we did do an episode of this podcast on this case, but we didn't actually release it. Like it was like left on the cutting room floor, I guess you could say. But I don't even remember that. Like I don't remember have any memory of talking about this case with you guys in depth for an episode. So yeah, maybe
it's funny because
don't know.
I don't remember a lot of details either from that episode, and I feel like maybe that's why we didn't release it, because maybe we just like weren't into it, and they like wasn't like good enough for us to release or something. Because I really don't. I remember doing it, but I don't remember the details of the case. Like they were kind of like all new when I looked at it again. So I was
I
just like,
think
oh, like maybe we just weren't into it. I don't know.
I think at the time when we just like when we were gonna do the case, I feel like there wasn't a whole lot of information out there that we could find that kind of made the case
Well, it
what
was
it
a pretty big
is.
case though. Like there would be stuff out. Like
Yeah,
there hasn't probably been new stuff since then except this
True.
documentary.
Yeah,
but
that
I
documentary
remember,
wasn't out then and stuff.
yeah,
So
like I
yeah.
remember we were gonna do it, but then we decided not to. I think, yeah, the case. I don't think we were really into it, but now that all these new stuff that came out about it, it's kind of glad that we're going to do it. 'Cause I think it's a good case to do.
Yeah. I'm just like interested to hear that if we even have a copy of it somewhere in our files, but hear our conversation about that case because I literally have no memory of talking about it with you.
It was
So.
probably one that I did, and it didn't do a very good job, so we probably didn't do it.
No, it
So-
was one of Steph's, but
So that's probably why, because I don't know, I was very bad at the beginning of this whole podcast thing.
well,
so.
I think there was like a lot of questions that me and AJ had when you were saying it, and you like just didn't know, so we just like didn't really. I think we like couldn't really follow the case really because we'd ask you a question and you're like, oh, I'm not sure, which is like fair. If you don't know, that's fine. But I think that's just like I couldn't even understand what happened at the end of that episode. Maybe I don't know.
yeah. So, yeah, but for whatever reason, it didn't make the cut. So anyway, we're here to talk about it now. But like I said, we're gonna spend just a couple of minutes, like 5-10 minutes maybe, just going over the basics of the case and what happened, so that if at the very least you don't know anything about this case, you can at least follow it just a little bit better. So this case happened back, like Katie said, it was 1989 is when the actual murders happened. It was August 20th of 1989. And on that night, there were, brothers Lyle and Erik Menendez who had made a frantic 911 call reporting that the shooting of their parents. So in the call, they claimed to have discovered their parents in the den where they found them unresponsive. And if you listen to the 911 call, there's a lot of, it's just nothing really would stand out to you as like being suspicious. It's a very urgent, very distressing call. So nothing really led responders to view them as anything other than victims. However, their behavior during and after the call began to raise eyebrows amongst the investigators. And there were a lot of things. I know they talk about it in the documentary. So the brothers, Lyle and Erik, they are interviewed in the documentary that we've been talking about called the Menendez Brothers. And one of the brothers mentioned how the investigators right away didn't do like an initial really good job on the investigation right away, because there was a lot of evidence that had the police maybe seen the brothers as a little bit more of suspicious rather than just victims, they would have done it. Like the brothers said that there was gunpowder residue that was probably still on their hands, that had the police done a swab of their hands, they would see that and would
and
be
also
very suspicious.
I think it's important to point out that these were like high profile victims. Like they lived in the Beverly Hills and they were like rich, wealthy, and the father was well known, a successful businessman. So I think that's probably why they treated them, like the brothers, the way they did, because it was like this high profile family. So they were going to treat them like suspects because of their status, basically.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there was nothing, they seem probably like the perfect family on the outside, so there would be no reason to suspect that the brothers would have anything to do with it, and thought that it was just, a break and enter or like a robbery gone wrong or something. So that was the initial attitude of the police, was that it was a home invasion and the brothers just came home and found their parents dead, which is what they had said in the 911 call. So it was a pretty gruesome crime scene. So the victims were Jose and Mary Louise Menendez, or Mary Louise went by Kitty, was what she was called. So Jose and Kitty Menendez, and it was the brothers' parents, and they had been shot multiple times with a shotgun, and there was just tons of blood everywhere. It was a pretty horrible crime scene. And I know that I think it's the prosecutor in the documentary says that the police had mentioned that when they got to the crime scene, there was brain matter from one of the victims that like fell out onto the floor while they were there. So just pretty brutal and pretty heinous right from the get-go. So like I said, the brothers were just seen as victims, and there was a lot of empathy towards them at the beginning. But then, as the investigation unfolded, there were a lot of inconsistencies with their story, or there were just some eyebrows being raised, especially regarding their spending habits after the murder. So the brothers went on like a spending spree because they got you know insurance money, or they got like money, and so they just bought lavish cars and went on shopping sprees and like trips and stuff like that. And a lot of people were very turned off by that because they thought it's not really congruent with you're grieving your parents' murders in a horribly brutal way, and you're out on shopping sprees and spending all this money. So that was initially one of the things that kind of raised some eyebrows. And there eventually, so the brothers had a therapist, and they talk a lot about this in the documentary. Dr. Oziel was a therapist, and in one of the therapy sessions, I believe it's Lyle Menendez, who is the older brother, he actually confesses to the murder to this therapist.
It was
in
Eric,
one of
I
their
think.
sessions.
It was Eric.
Oh, was it Eric? Oh, I thought it was. Oh, it was Eric.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, one of the brothers, anyway. One of the brothers admits to the crimes in the therapy session to this doctor, to this therapist, and so eventually events unfold, and the confession comes out, and he reports it, and the brothers are arrested for the murder of their parents. So that's that's what kind of sets in motion the arrest and all of this stuff, and the brothers talk about in the documentary too that they felt as though there was obviously a sensationalizing of it from the beginning, but also he said if they had just called and asked them to come in for arrest, they would have done that. But it's like as if the police wanted to capture the perp walk, as they call it, and have that scene of them, being taken into the courthouse in handcuffs and stuff like that. Like that was what they were kind of setting up. So they made it be that way rather than, the brothers weren't going to flee. They weren't going to not, if they had just called them and said, come to the courthouse, they would have done that. So that was kind of one thing that made them see it.
Eric was even like overseas, and he came back specifically because he knew his brother had been arrested. So he came back so that they could arrest him as well. It wasn't like he was, overseas and never coming back. It was like he purposely came back and knew what was going to happen when he came back. So I think that says a lot about them.
Yeah, that's like the opposite of what happens. Usually if, you're under arrest or you have a warrant, you want to flee the country. You're not going to come back to the country under those circumstances. So yeah, they weren't like going to evade justice or whatever. They were just, they could have done it differently. But the police didn't have any interest in that. They wanted that perp walk. So then the brothers were charged with the murder of their parents. And the perception of the brothers from the media, and so I think the public perception was that they were just these spoiled rich kids who had killed their parents to inherit the money and get the money, which then when you look at their spending habits and all that stuff afterwards, obviously that kind of feeds into that narrative. So maybe going on that spending spree and doing all of that stuff that they were doing wasn't probably the best look. So I think that was largely the public perception, was that there was just these two cold-blooded murderers who were just like these spoiled rich kids. But it was actually during the trials that the truth came to light. So during the first trial, the defense was that the brothers had killed their parents because they had suffered, since they were children, years of sexual abuse from their father, Jose, and that they had just been living with that since they were children. And I think at the time of the murders, Eric was 18 and Lyle might have been 20 or 21. Yeah, 21. So from the time they were like 5 or 6 all the way to being 18 or 21, they had lived in that household with their father who was sexually abusing them. And so that was the turning point in the trial for the defense. And that was, and Erik and Lyle both took the stand, and in the documentary they show, long detailed clips of that part of the trial, and you hear their testimony talking about in graphic detail about their father sexually abusing them. And whereas on the flip side, the prosecution, of course, had the narrative of they were just spoiled rich kids who had killed their parents out of cold blood. So the first trial happens, and it's actually a hung
Yeah.
jury.
I just want to say, like, I
Oh,
think like one of the interesting things about this, it's not like we're debating whether they did it or not. Like, we know that they did it, they confess, but it's like why they did it, and if their defense is actually true, and like if it should be first degree murder, if it should be first degree murder or voluntary manslaughter. I think were the two charges that they were like battling against. So I think it's just interesting that they for sure did it, but the whole question is like why they did it.
Yeah, I just want can we just go? I just want to talk about when they were arrested for a second because I kind of didn't get a chance to jump in, but I want to say I feel like the police um kind of pinpointed them against each other, like the brothers, to see if one brother would say a different story than the other. Because you know how sometimes they do that if like two people are involved in a murder. But I just feel like they just try to I don't know, backlash each brother to for one of them tell the truth and the other one to be caught in a lie. Do you know what I mean? I feel like the way they handle it, it wasn't because in the end, they both cooperated and they got arrested and like Katie said, was it Erik that came back from overseas to be arrested? They're very they're like I don't want to say kind people because what they did was so heinous, but you can tell that there's remorse there. They know what they did was wrong. I just feel like for the police to kind of pinpoint each other, it was just kind of not really fair and didn't really show who they really were. But also, I wanted to say when I first watched this documentary, or before I watched this documentary, I don't know, I was on the fence of yes, I know they did it, but do they really need to be in jail for what they did? It was really I was kind of on the fence. And then we'll talk about it later about the documentary and what my opinions are. But for a while, I was I don't know if they really deserve to be sentenced the way they were. But anyways, I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, also I think it is interesting that neither one of them ever like turned on each other and trying to point the finger and blame the other one, because you see that so often when it's more than one person that commits a crime. Will be like, "Oh, it actually wasn't me, it was him." And then the other person will say, "No, it was actually his idea and he pulled the trigger." But they both had the same story and they were saying that they both did it together, and they never really blamed either, they never even blamed each other, which was just kind of I think shows how close they were, but also we'll get into this, but kind of what they went through together. So they were kind of just bonded in that way to always stick with each other. So I think that was super interesting.
yeah, yeah, and I have notes on that too of what my takeaway was about how they stuck together the whole time, and that. But I was also going to say, I mentioned the confession to the therapist, but there was also, which they describe in the documentary, there was a letter that Lyle had written to Erik, because after they were arrested, obviously they were in jail awaiting trial, and they were in obviously separate cells or separate jails, but Lyle had written a letter to Erik, and just talking about their family secrets and all of that stuff. And Erik was supposed to destroy the letter right after reading it, but he didn't, and it was found by police, or it surfaced, and that was kind of what, because the brothers, you can tell as they're describing it, they never wanted these secrets of their family to come out, because like Katie mentioned, the father Jose was like a music mogul. I think he was in the music industry and he lived in LA, and he had, they were very rich and he was very well known and powerful, so it wasn't like they wanted to sort of tarnish that reputation of their family. So they didn't really have any intention of having this information about their sexual abuse by their father coming out. But it was kind of, once that letter resurfaced, and then it pretty much forced them. They were like, well, now we have to tell, because it's going to come up. There's all these allusions in that letter to their family secrets and having to have all this stuff. So there was no going back after that point. They really had to talk about what those secrets were, and they obviously do.
Yeah, and I remember because like, that was, like, a huge secret, right? Like, nobody knew what really was going on behind closed doors, and that they even said that in the documentary, like, when they found out, yes, they were guilty, they killed their parents, it was like, there must be more to the story, like, why would they do that? It obviously wasn't just for money, and so they're just like, "What are we missing? There's something here," and then they finally pieced it together, yeah, that there was, like, these just, like, years of abuse that had happened, apparently, and so that was like, yes, now it kind of makes sense, and I mean, it's a good thing it came out, that's, like, their whole defense, basically, like, if they didn't have that, it would I feel like they probably would've held that secret forever if they weren't kind of forced to, like, put it out there as their defense. That's how, like, ashamed and just embarrassed and, just didn't want that out there. Even after they had killed their parents, they didn't want the world to know, like, why or what they had done, so it's just super, like, complicated.
Also wanted to
Yeah.
mention, like, sorry, the only reason like that letter was ever found was because the police said that they tried to escape that morning or something, or that whatever, and then they were gonna, so they went in to search their cell, and then they found that letter. But then at the end, he's like, "Oh, never mind. They weren't trying to escape. Like, my bad," type thing. I'm like,
Yeah,
why
I don't
didn't
even
you
remember
just
why
say, "I
they
want to search your"?
I
You
know,
just
I don't
say
even
you want
remember
to
why
search
they
it.
said that yeah, maybe that was the reason why they wanted to search it, they made up that excuse because I don't think they ever really said why they thought they were trying to escape, which is weird, but, I mean, it's a good thing they did search their cell because can you imagine if that letter was destroyed? Then it was just like, that never would have gotten out there, so it was, I guess, like a blessing in disguise that they were like, "Yeah, we're searching your cell."
Yeah, and I think when you're watching the documentary, it's not a lot of times if there's a trial and there's the defense of, I was in fear for my life or I was being sexually abused or whatever, it's like, that person might just create that to have that doubt, but you can tell that they weren't going to use that as a defense. Like they didn't want it to come out. It was all reluctant. So that makes it a little bit more, believable, or you can understand a little bit more. It's not just like something they pulled out of thin air
But
to
they
be the
that's
defense.
also kind of used against them because it's like, "Well, why is there no evidence of this in the past? Why have you never brought this up before? Like, why is all of a sudden it just kind of came out of nowhere?" Like you said, it did kind of come out of nowhere to people that, didn't really know the case. They're like, "Oh, now they have this huge defense of years of abuse." It's like, "Well, there's no evidence of that." So it's like and a lot of people didn't believe them. Like you'll see in that documentary, like everyone made fun of them. They were saying, "Oh, it's all bullshit. Like they're just arrogant brothers that are, made up this story." And so it did kind of not work for them in a way because it was such a tightly kept secret.
Yeah, that's true. And when you didn't have any like physical evidence of it, it's more like their word. You just have to either believe their word or not believe their word because that's all you have to really go on. But as we'll talk a little bit more, there is someone who actually did know that it was happening or that they had told. Um, but obviously she never told anyone, and it now surfaced, and then it surfaced later. But anyway, we'll get into that. But the also all of this came out in the trial about the sexual abuse, and like I said, Erik and Lyle both took the stand, and I believe the trials were like in 92 or 93, so it was a couple of years after the murders. But anyway, they had the first trial. It was a hung jury, so the jury could not come to a conclusion. And they interview one of the jurors in this documentary, and she describes how it was sort of like split along gender lines. So the guys or the men on the jury thought that the brothers were 100% guilty and had wanted to convict, and then it was the women on the jury who had a little bit more of that hesitation, and they didn't know whether they wanted to sentence, life in prison or um, give them the full sentence. So anyway, it ended up being a hung jury. So they had to do an entire retrial, and they had different. The prosecutor was different in the retrial because the original prosecutor didn't want to do the retrial, and then in the second trial, it was vastly different from the first one because the judge in the second trial really didn't admit a lot of the or didn't allow a lot of the evidence or
It was the
the
same judge,
testimony to
wasn't
come.
it?
Oh, was it the same judge or could it
Yeah, I
it could
think
have
it
been?
was because I think it was the same judge, and because the first time they said talked about this in a documentary where it was like he was kind of embarrassed about how they didn't get a conviction and how they just was like so split 50-50. And so the second time he was kind of determined to get that conviction, and that's why he didn't allow a lot of things into the trial that were in the first time. Like Lyle wasn't on the stand at all, so anything that he would have said and those witnesses like never even came into the trial that time. So I'm pretty sure it was the same judge, and he was just like determined to get it done this time.
Okay, yeah, that's Tyler. Maybe I missed that detail. But yeah, the same judge. So, but the trial was just like Katie said, very different. Like all the testimony from Lyle and Eric just wasn't in admissible. So the jury didn't hear anything about the sexual abuse, or even if they did little details, it was not the in-depth details like they had when they were on the stand originally. And there was also no cameras in the courtroom for the second trial at all, so they think that obviously maybe the cameras in the courtroom, it just adds a different dynamic and a different layer that was there in the first trial, but not in the second trial. So second trial was just very bare bones compared to the first one. And then when the jury went to deliberate for the second trial, they came back with a unanimous decision to convict them of first degree murder, and that came with a life sentence. So it's just wild to me that, you know, obviously you're going to get different results when you have completely different evidence presented, or different, not even different evidence, but just you're missing one whole side of the defense. You don't get that. So it's obviously not really that hard to believe why the second jury would come back unanimous if you're not hearing that strong defense on the other side. So
I'm assuming it was
go ahead.
different jury members, right? Second
Yeah, it was
time.
different. It was
Oh,
different
yeah.
jurors. Yeah.
I was gonna say that would make no
Um,
sense.
yeah.
I was
No.
like, you can't have
Yeah.
the same jury members and maybe like, oh, we didn't
Definitely
decide this
nuanced.
time, but this time we are. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It was like it was new jurors and everything. But yeah, they came back with unanimous decision. So, and the retrial had happened, and I think they describe in the documentary too how between the first trial and the second trial, the whole OJ thing had happened, and the OJ case happened in the same jurisdiction. It was LA County. So, you know, you have the Menendez brothers, the first highly publicized trial, and then you have the OJ trial. And in that case, you saw the person who everyone or many people thought was guilty, you saw him get off and he was acquitted. And so in the documentary, they talk about how in that second trial, maybe they saw it as like sort of retribution. It's like, well, we're not going to let these innocent people walk, or we're not going to let these guilty people walk free. We're going to make sure that we get them.
Yeah,
So
and I
that's what
think
played into it.
yeah, that was definitely a huge thing. That was like they were trying to get like I don't know, kind of like revenge from after the OJ trial. But I think one thing to remember or like point out is like the first trial, the jury had an option of well, acquittal probably, and first degree murder or voluntary manslaughter. So like they could have chosen voluntary manslaughter, which wouldn't have been like life without parole, and then first degree murder, which was life without parole, and it could have been the death penalty. But then the second trial, because the judge had like restricted all this evidence and stuff, really the only choice the jury had was either acquittal or first degree murder. So they didn't have that like involuntary manslaughter to fall back on. And that was what the first jury was hung up on. It was like half of them wanted first degree murder and half of them just wanted voluntary manslaughter. And so the second time they didn't have that option. So it was either set them free, even though obviously they knew they were guilty, or first degree murder. So that was like a huge difference. And really the jury didn't really have a choice that was reasonable in that case.
Yeah. And like, that's just another example of how you can see they basically rigged it to get the result they wanted in the second case, or in the second trial, because yeah,
because obviously they were guilty. Like no one's gonna say, "Oh, let's set them free," regardless of whether they were abused or not. Like in my opinion, I feel like they still killed their parents. They still need to go to jail. But you know, whether it should be first degree murder and life without parole is like a different thing, right? So yeah, it was like you
yeah,
said. I'm pretty sure they set it up that way, so to almost guarantee that they would get first degree murder.
yeah. And because obviously, like, a manslaughter charge is more like, maybe it's more palatable for people who don't want to sentence them for life. It's like, okay, there's this other option. But when you have the second trial, when you don't have that other option, and no one wants to really have them walk free without any sort of prison time, or acquit them. And again, especially after the OJ thing, like the fact that it's in the same county, it's like it's LA, it's right after. I think the retrial was, I think OJ was acquitted in like October of 95, and then the retrial was in 96, like March of 96 or something. It was like only like a matter of months after that. And, you know, that tainted people's minds too, because you had this acquittal of this person that everyone saw as guilty, or a lot of people saw as guilty. So they didn't want it to happen again so soon after. So that was just kind of bad luck for the brothers, really, in that aspect of it. So yeah, they were sentenced to life in prison without any chance of parole. That was their sentence. So they have been in jail. Well, they were arrested in 89 or 90, and they've been behind bars since then. So it's been 35 years, coming up on 35 years at this point. So that has been, they filed appeals and everything like that, but once their appeals were denied, they didn't really have any other recourse. So that's been really the status of it, is
Yeah.
they've been in jail for
Um
35 years.
I think we should also talk about like why, like kind of go more into their defense of why it would have been voluntary manslaughter, and like why the defense was pushing for kind of self-defense rather than just first degree murder. Because I think it's important to make that distinction. So kind of like why anyone would feel it wasn't first degree murder, because when you think about it, the way we're talking about it is like, yeah, they just kind of killed their parents, and like that they just planed it and killed them, which they kind of did. But so like you watch these documentaries and you watch like the court, you watch the trials on court TV and YouTube or whatever, like it really goes into the history of this family and the secrets that a lot of people like knew or didn't know about them. And one thing that came up in the first trial was like all of the witnesses that came on the stand, and like out of like 50 people, like not one of them had a nice thing to say about Jose Menendez, really, except they said his secretary, liked him at least and would say some nice things. But everybody else said that he was just like a super mean guy, and he wasn't nice, and nobody liked him at all. But he was like successful and had money, so that's why people put up with him, I guess, and no one stood up to him. And that's like one thing that the brothers would say, would be like nobody would ever stand up to him. And if they did, like one time Lyle or Erik said one time like a car salesman stood up to him, and like a grown man, and the car salesman ended up like crying, like he was like a grown man crying in the car dealership because of his father. So that's just kind of the way he was. And so that's why the brothers, they were very, and like they controlled their life, apparently, the mother and the father. So everything they did went through their father. He told them what they were going to do, when they were going to do it. Like they controlled their life in that way. And even after when they went off to university, like Jose picked all of Erik's courses and where he was going to go to university, and said that he was actually going to come home and not live on residence for the whole time, like things like that. And so, and they just felt like they didn't really have a choice in that. And so, and it goes back to the sexual abuse. It started early for Erik and like lasted all the way up until he was like 18. And his father would say that he would kill him and whoever he told if he ever told anybody. So he was just scared and didn't want to say anything. And that's kind of how all of this whole thing, they were scared of their father. And it came out also that their mother knew the whole time and didn't do anything. And so, and also it came out that like Lyle or Kyle, or I keep calling him Kyle, Erik would say that his mother like knew things about his life that he had never told his parents at all. Like she would know like girls that he liked, or like if he was ever going somewhere, or what his plans were, and he had never like told anybody those kind of things, and his mother always knew somehow. And it came out that she actually had like a recording device that she had set up, so all his phone calls like in and out of the house, they were recording and she would listen to, so she just like knew everything about his life. And that's just kind of the level of control that they had over their kids. And so they just never felt, I guess, that they had any kind of freedom or choice in their life. And when all this came out, and then when they ended up killing their parents, it was because Lyle said that he was finally going off to university. He was going to go to a university far away so he wouldn't have to be with his parents, and he could finally get away from the sexual abuse. But then his father was like, no, you're going to go to UCLA and you're going to stay home like 4 nights a week at least or something. And so that's when he was like, oh, he just felt hopeless and that he didn't really have a way out of the situation. And that's when he finally told his brother Lyle that his father was like still sexually abusing him up until that point. And that's when this whole thing was like, Lyle kind of took over. It was like, I'm going to talk to him about it. He's not going to do that ever again. You're going to come with me to university. And that's kind of where the whole thing unraveled from there.
Eric's relationship with his father was a lot more controlling than Lyle's. I feel like Eric had took the brunt of things more than Lyle. Like, I remember in the documentary, Lyle was saying that like Eric was more of like an emotional child, and his father saw him as weak, where Lyle was like not weak and never cried, and his dad maybe took like was more proud of Lyle than he was of Eric. So I feel like Eric had all this emotion bottled up and felt like nobody like the only person he could talk to was Lyle, but also Lyle kind of like I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. Like looked up to his father, I say, because his father was always proud of him and always thought of him as successful, where Eric was just this weak person who could be easily controlled. So I feel like their relationship with their parents was so different, but yet they both suffered in the same way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think Lyle was definitely his father's favorite, and he was. They even just say that Lyle was like just more brave and would stand up to his father a little bit more, because I think Lyle was also sexually abused when he was little, but then he, for whatever reason, stood up to his father, or something. I can't remember exactly what happened, and then it just stopped, and that's when he went over to Eric. So, and then he very much just. I remember when I watched some of the court hearings, Lyle was saying that his father would come home and he would hug Lyle, but he would never hug Eric. He would never even hug his mother. He would always hug him and talk to him at the table, like at the supper table, and congratulate him and say he was doing such a good job. And he just never did that to Eric. Like Eric was like the, don't really care about Eric enough to even want to talk to him or hug him. So that was kind of that dynamic. And for whatever reason, he stopped sexually abusing Lyle and went over to Eric. And that lasted for, up until Eric was 18. So yeah, just super, super different. And I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like they go into obviously the documentary, but then other, articles or even like the court recordings. Like, yeah, they do go into a lot. You learn a lot about the dynamics within that family. Obviously that they never wanted anyone else to know, but then obviously during the trial, it all comes out. Like, yeah, like the mother did know about the sexual abuse, like allegedly Lyle and Eric had told Kitty, but she just said, your father loves you or whatever. Like she didn't really obviously do anything to try to stop it. I don't know, like she knew, but it's like I couldn't really tell, or maybe whether she believed that it had happened or she knew it was happening and she believed them, but she just didn't care. Like that to me, I didn't really know that distinction. Like maybe she didn't. Either way, it's horrible, but like either way, she didn't believe them or she did and didn't care.
My impression was that she knew, because during Eric's testimony in the trial, he talked about that, and then his mother, he was on that leading up to the murders, like one of those nights before the murders, he was like talking to his mother. They got into an argument, and his mother said something along the lines of like, yes, of course I knew. Like, do you think I'm stupid? Like, she just like knew the whole time. And the fact that Eric thought she didn't know offended her, because she was like, I'm not stupid. Like, of course I knew, kind of thing. So she knew the whole time, just didn't do anything. And that was another trigger for Eric, because he was like, well, my mother knew this whole time. She didn't protect me. She didn't try to stop it. And so she was just like this whole other person to him, he said, because like now, obviously that about somebody. They're not going to, your own mother's not going to protect you from this. So yeah, I think she knew the whole time.
So what was wrong with her then? She's just a horrible person too then, obviously. Like didn't care at all. Like didn't, I don't know. It just,
Well, yeah, I think
I'm
she
feeling
was
oh, go ahead.
scared of her husband as well in a way, kind of thing. Because I remember, again, during like these court testimonies, like Lyle said that every time like the father would come home, it was like the dynamic just kind of changed. Like everybody was just kind of tense and scared. Like now that he came through the door, it was just like, very different. Like it just switched just like that. And every time they would get into trouble or do something, Kitty would always be like, I'm going to tell your father. If you don't do this, I'm telling your father. And he always knew about things that they had done and gotten into trouble. Like, even if he wasn't home, like, she would call him and tell him right away. And so every time, then he'd come home and just be like angry as soon as he got through the door, kind of thing. So I think she kind of used that against her kids, but also probably felt scared of him in the same way. So, I mean, obviously, that's not an excuse for why she would let this go on, but that's maybe just a little bit into her mindset. Definitely not excusable at all.
Yeah. So yeah, both of them, and I think they do describe it like I think it's I kind of get them. Sorry, I kind of get them mixed up. Lyle and Eric. Like I forget who said what for the documentary because they are both interviewed, but it's just audio clips. Like you're not seeing video, so you kind of forget. I don't know who said what, but one of them says that obviously they regret what they did, but they especially for their mother, because I mean they didn't really see a way that they couldn't kill their mother. Like obviously their anger and the actions were more directed towards their father who had been sexually assaulting them, but there was really no way that they couldn't also kill their mother who was there, because she would have obviously she's taken the father's side so many times, like not believing the brothers and kind of just keeping them in that situation. So it's not like she would not like she it's not like she would protect the brothers if they had not killed her, just killed the father, and she knew like they didn't feel obviously that she was going to protect them from that. So it's like almost like they had to kill her as well. So I don't know, but they seemed like obviously they had a little bit more sympathy, or a little bit more feel a little bit more maybe remorseful towards killing their mother than killing their father. But from what we just talked about, like obviously Kitty was complicit in a lot of ways too. Whether she was scared of him, she was a victim. I don't know if he was abusing her too, but she was a victim of him in many ways, but also allowed it to continue happening and didn't really do much to protect the brothers. So
Well, yeah,
yeah.
and according to the brothers, like their mother was also, not very nice to them growing up ever. Like she would always they would get into arguments and she would say like, I hate you, I wish you were never born. Like she would say that all the time. And so, like that's just kind of a thing that they got used to. And then so they knew that they could never go to their mother if they had a problem, so they knew they could never confide in her because everything was going to go to their father anyway. So it's not like they had a safe place with their mother. She was just like kind of an extension of their father, basically. So that's kind of the dynamic they had growing up, their whole life with their parents. So that just kind of gives some background. It's just like what led up to all of this, and going even closer to the murder, like they did, according to them, they feared for their life because like Lyle had said that his father said that if he ever told anybody about what was happening, he would kill him and he would kill whoever he told. And so they were both scared that, because then Lyle did confront Jose about it and told him to like stop the abuse, and he confronted him and they got no big argument. So like they were both scared that now that he stood up to his father, like Lyle was basically going to be killed as well. And according to Eric, like his father did threaten his life before, like with a knife up to his throat, saying like, don't ever. This is when I think Eric actually stood up to him one time and said like, stop, I don't want to do this, like the sexual abuse. And that's when he pulled a knife on him up to his throat and said, I'll kill you if you ever say no to me again or something. And so he felt like that's something that his father actually would do, was like threaten, or actually not just threaten him, but actually would kill him. And so apparently both the brothers were afraid for their lives because of this whole situation, and because the secret had come out and their father knew that Lyle knew as well. So that's kind of their state of mind leading up to the murders.
Yeah. And when you say the secret came out, like it didn't come out like to public, but just out to whereas Lyle knew, and within the family it was out, I guess. Because in the documentary they talk about too that the argument between imperfect self-defense, like self-defense and then imperfect self-defense, and there was like important to distinguish that, because imperfect self-defense, it's like where you still fear, because obviously when you have the defense of, when you're saying it was self-defense, it's like you fear, like you fear for your
You'll-
life in that moment.
yeah,
You're
in that
protecting yourself.
moment. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, you're protecting yourself. But then imperfect self-defense is like you fear for your life, but there's not something happening in that moment. Like you're not being beaten up right at that moment, but it's like you still fear for your life because of the situation. Like
Yeah,
that's
I
probably not the
think they
best
described it
description of it,
good.
but
Yeah, it was like if somebody came in off the street and was like looking at your situation, they would have no idea that your life was in danger, even though you felt that it was. And also, it even counts like imperfect self defense if you think your life is in danger. And so you defend yourself because you think your life's in danger. But even if it's not, but you actually honestly think it is and you're mistaken, and then you kill someone because of that, that's still imperfect self defense in a way because you thought something was happening when it actually really wasn't. But yeah, that's just kind of like an interesting distinction there.
yeah, and that's really hard to
I
prove, I
never heard
feel.
of I never heard of imperfect self defense. So when I heard that, I was like, I have no idea what that was. So that's that was new
Yeah,
to me.
me neither. But and I feel, but like it's really hard to prove that. Like, how do you prove? Like, you have to prove that you're in your own mind, you feel like you're in danger, but like no one from an outside perspective would know. So then you have to convince at a trial a bunch of people from an outside perspective that you did feel that way. Like I feel like that's impossible, almost impossible to even prove in
Yeah,
court.
yeah, and I think that's why, like, the defense, like, went into like so much detail about their past and the abuse and like their mindset and why they were so scared. Like when you watch, like I watched like the 3 hour YouTube video of like of Eric's testimony, and it's all these little details about like what was going on and like just you think like it's like why is this necessary? Like they're showing a picture like, is this your room? Is this the corner of your room? And he'd be like, yes. And he's like, is there a desk right in the picture? He'd be like, yes. And I was like, why are they going into all this detail? But it really is just kind of like establish like the situation and like what the whole scene was. And yeah, it's kind of really interesting to actually like watch those things in detail. But anyway, yeah. So my point was that like the whole defense was their mindset and how they kind of been like, and even Eric said himself, like he was kind of groomed by his father to not reach out for help because if he did, then he knew he would get hurt, he would get killed, other people would get hurt. It would tarnish the family. Like you'd be this huge like a letdown for the family if you ever said anything. So he was groomed from a young age to believe that, and so that's why he kind of never really did anything to protect himself up until he was like 18. Um and yeah, I think that's why the defense in the first trial just hammered that so hard so you could get into their mindset of what they actually felt like and why they were scared. Because yeah, they both felt that they were going to be killed. They talk about going on like this boat trip where it was just the two of them and their parents and then like the boat captain or whatever, and they felt like they didn't want to go because they thought that this is when their parents were going to kill them and I don't know, like push them overboard or something. So they felt like they'd make it look like an accident and that was going to be the end. And so they actually were scared, apparently, according to them. That's why they went and bought these shotguns and the ammunition, and I think they like used like tried to use fake IDs to buy the guns so it couldn't be traced back to them. But like some of the things that they had done made it look like they were planning this because they, bought these guns and then afterwards they got rid of the guns. They never actually found the guns, and then they tried to play it off as if they had found their parents like this because they were trying to cover it up. So there are like these sketchy things that make it look like they had planned out this thing in advance. But then you think of the circumstances like, well, they had these guns in the house because they were scared for their lives. And they killed their parents in that moment because they felt that something was happening and that they needed to. So I don't know. I find it's just super complicated.
Yeah, and like yeah, because like a lot of the premeditation, like I think there was also, I don't know if they talk about it in the documentary, but I did read elsewhere or I knew that they also had tried to make it seem like they bought and they were going to have an alibi that they went to see a movie or something, so they had planned to like go and buy the ticket, or maybe they actually did buy the ticket for the movie so that it could show the timestamp of that they were going to be at the movies. And also they did say in the documentary that when the police first arrived on the crime scene, they didn't find any shell casings or anything like that. Like it had been cleaned up, and that the shell casings and have been, or most of them I guess had been collected, so they didn't actually find anything. So all that stuff, like buying the guns, like the brothers did have this plan going into it. So then with the prosecution's arguing that it's premeditated and all this stuff, it's hard to then defend like, well, no, it was self-defense, because in self-defense you don't have a plan of all this stuff if you're just acting in the moment and you're just on a whim, like you feel in danger, you just do what you can in that moment out of fear for your life. So then the evidence from the prosecution of all this premeditation and all of this stuff kind of goes against that thing. So very complicated, hard to prove, hard to
and I think like there's this line between it like there was a premeditation for them to buy the guns for protection, but I don't think it was premeditation buying the guns just to kill them because they wanted them dead. So yeah, it's like this very, very fine line of well, they did plan to buy the guns in case, to kill them, but it was like in case they needed it for protection kind of thing. So yeah, super.
That's where my head was going. Like, they didn't buy the guns because they were gonna shoot their parents. They bought them because they needed to protect themselves. I don't think, like, in my mind, and like watching the documentary and like learning about the case, in my mind, I physically don't think that their number one idea at that time was to shoot their parents. I think they just bought them just because they needed protection from their dad, because like you said, like their dad was not a nice person, and so they needed something to protect them because their mother wasn't going to protect them. So who was going to protect them?
They just kind of like even just like scare their parents enough to be like, don't, like, you're not killing us. We can protect ourselves, until they could get out of there. Maybe, I don't know. And so what led up to the murders that night was Eric had said that he knew that Lyle was going to tell his father to stop the sexual abuse against Eric. And so he stayed out late that night because he didn't want to be there when it was happening. And he just like kept calling Lyle to ask like if he had done it yet. But his father was on a business trip and he like didn't come home until late. Anyway, and then he finally came home late at night, and he said that his mother, like, the doors were always locked and they never gave the kids keys to get in. So every time they would go out somewhere and then want to come back, they always had to knock on the door to get into their own house, because so then that was like another form of control, because then their mother and their father would know every time that they were gone and were coming back. So he said that was like another thing that his mother did. And so he came home, and his like he could just tell something was like, he knew that Lyle had talked to his father, and his mother was now like, she said something like, she'd always say like, I hate you, I wish you were never born. But then she also said like, the family is ruined or something, or the family is not gonna make it, or something along those lines. I can't remember exactly what she said, which was like, she'd never said something like that before. And it was his mind, it was like, okay, now they're going to kill us, because she's saying that the family's over basically, and it ends with them, I guess. And so that's kind of why the whole thing was triggered that night. Like, he ran out of the house, he ran out to like what is it, like the boathouse or something that Lyle stayed in. And there was like this huge argument, and then that's why they were scared, because they just felt like something was going down that night, and that's what kind of led to all this. So yeah.
So yeah, just very like a complicated situation. And I think that the documentary did a really good job of like kind of showcasing, like showing all the clips from the trial of like their testimony, and kind of explaining a lot of these things. So that was good. So, and this case all came back into the news again in late 2024 because of this documentary, but then also Ryan Murphy's fictionalized version of this case through the show Monsters. And then I think there was sort of this resurgence of this case, and there was like a call or like a petition for people to revisit the case, or maybe to resentence the brothers, because there was just a lot of empathy that they had been in jail for 35 years. And also at the time of the trial in the early 90s, there wasn't as much of an understanding about child sexual abuse, especially for male victims. So given, what we know now, maybe if the trial had happened now in the same exact facts in the same situation, like maybe they wouldn't have been sentenced, because there's a little bit more of an understanding or an empathy about childhood sexual abuse that they didn't really have necessarily then. So there was this call to relook at this case. And then there was, that new evidence of, well, what I kind of alluded to earlier was that this cousin, I think it was a cousin, who had been told by Lyle or Eric, or probably Eric, when they were younger that this was happening. And in the documentary, the cousin talks about, obviously she didn't tell anyone because she's probably told, like he said he would kill me if I told anyone. And so she kept it to herself. But she also said that no one else seemed to be doing anything. No one else seemed to have, like, she just said, maybe it's not true then, because like everyone else is acting normally. And she just thought that like everything else seemed fine. So she didn't really
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
she actually talked to Kitty about it. So she did bring it up to Kitty, and Kitty told her that, he was lying, it wasn't true. So and then she just felt like, okay, yeah, no one's doing anything, no one seems to care about this, so maybe it actually isn't true.
Yeah. And she was like younger. So she probably thought, like, she didn't really, I guess when you're younger, you don't really have that sort of understanding of exactly like the dynamics in a situation like that. So you might think, okay, the mother is saying it's, and she probably thought like, if it really was happening and the mother knew, why wouldn't something be done? Why is it still going on? Why is nobody talking about it? Why is everyone acting normal? So maybe then you think like, well, maybe it's not true then. She's saying it's not true because in your mind you're thinking, no, the mother is going to protect her son if that's happening. And the mother seemed to shut it down or didn't seem concerned, and everyone else is acting normal. So she in her own mind thought, okay, well, maybe it wasn't true. But this had all, she had been told this back like before, obviously before the trial and all this stuff happens. And then this came out later that there was, I think it was a letter that he had written to this cousin or something, or just this information that the cousin had known that kind of proves that like it obviously was happening. It wasn't just something that came out of thin air at the trial, because there's that evidence that it had been brought up earlier. Um, so so this all comes out. The documentaries come out. There's like this renewed interest in the case, and so then they announced that they were going to the attorney general or the district attorney, whoever, I can't remember the exact person, but they said that they were going to have a decision about whether they were going to do a resentencing for the brothers. And if they do have a resentencing, or they're given a new sentence, like maybe they would already have served out what the sentence would be. So then they would be let out of prison, because if they get a lesser sentence with just manslaughter or whatever it is, or they get re-examine the sentence, then maybe they would have the chance to get out on parole, or they would have already served their sentence. So there is a possibility that they could get out of prison given that new information.
I was gonna say, like, if they resent them to manslaughter, like they've already done like 35 years, which is longer, than a manslaughter. I'm assuming a manslaughter conviction, right?
Well, I think manslaughter can still be life in prison, but like
Okay.
there's a minimum with like, I think there's still possibility for parole with manslaughter
So
sometimes. It just depends.
either way, like they've already done 35 years. So like, what's the point of like, oh, now you're gonna put another 35 years? They're gonna be like dead by the time they even get a chance to get out.
Yeah, I think, I don't even know if it would be manslaughter or whatever it is, but even if it's like, even if it's still first degree murder, but like I think because it's like first degree murder with no chance of parole, like life in prison, no chance of parole. Whereas even if they resentenced it to like life in prison with a chance of parole, they could, because usually you're eligible for parole probably in 25 years or 30 years or whatever. So they've already done that. So if that was like the new sentence, it's like, okay, they now would have a parole hearing and they would have like that opportunity to apply for parole. And if they're stellar prisoners and they, have done really good, then they might have a really good chance of getting parole. So I think that's been in the news, and there's sort of been this hope that maybe there would be a resentencing. And I think the resentencing was supposed to happen in late 2024. I think it was in December, but it got pushed to January 30th and 31st. It had two different dates, so I think probably going to do it separately. One, like 30th would be one brother, 31st would be the other. And you're hearing this episode's released on January 29th, so it's like right before. So you'll know probably by tomorrow or the 31st what this decision is. So I guess that would be kind of the next steps. If they do decide to resentence, I don't think they're going to resentence on the 30th or 31st. I think it just means they're going to decide whether they will do a resentencing. So you won't even know what that even is. So if that is what the decision is, that they're going to resentence, then it would be a whole procedure. It could still be several months, obviously. But then if they decide that they're not going to resentence, then that means that it would just end there, and they're just going to keep the convictions as is. So it is kind of a pretty big decision, or a pretty big development that has the potential where the brothers you could see them getting out of prison. And I think a lot of people are obviously on different sides of that debate. Obviously there's probably people out there who maybe, if they don't know enough about the case, they're just think these guys are two cold-blooded killers who murdered their parents, they should be in jail forever. And then there's other people who maybe have a little more understanding, or a little more empathy, and say, yeah, they deserved some time, but maybe not their whole entire lives, and they've already been in for 35 years. At what point have they already served their sentence or served their time? So you kind of have people on both sides of that debate.
That's where I am.
Oh.
Sorry, that's where I'm at. Like, at the very beginning, when I heard about this case, like back when we were gonna do it years ago, I was like, oh yeah, they're guilty, whatever, like whatever. But now that all this other evidence came out, I'm like, yes, they still deserve to be in prison, but I think their sentencing should have been lesser. I think all of this sexual abuse and all of the family's history and all the like all this anger and stuff built up, and I think it was self-defense in a way. I feel like they were gonna kill them before his father could kill them. I think it's like that type of situation. I don't think they should have spent their whole entire life in jail. I don't see them as like angry monsters. I feel like they've done their time. They obviously feel remorse for what they did. And I don't know, I feel bad for them, but I also feel like obviously what they did, it wasn't right. But I think them spend their whole time in prison, I don't think it's something that they should have gotten.
Yeah, and one thing that also came up was like, well, why didn't you just leave? I mean, you were 18 and 21. Why couldn't they just move out or whatever? But then, like I said, Erik said just because he was groomed his whole life to think that he was never allowed to get away, he could never do that. And so he could never stand up to his father. And so I guess when you just like live that your whole life, you just don't see that as an option. And so he just really felt that there was no way out for him. And he said that he had like contemplated suicide. It's not like he didn't want to kill himself, but he said he also didn't want to live. It was just like, hopelessness and depression, and felt that there was no way out. So that's kind of his mindset there. And also another thing regarding their like resentencing, apparently there's another piece of evidence that someone else apparently came forward saying that José Menendez raped them as well. So there could be further evidence that he didn't just do this to his sons, but other people as well. And so if that is the case, then yeah, there's also puts more validity into what the brothers are claiming. So yeah, to me at this point, I feel like it's not a debate of whether they like. I don't think there should be doubt in anyone's mind that the abuse actually did take place. Like, I know that they're like in that documentary, they were saying some people just don't believe them. Like, that's just not, they just think they made it all up. But I feel like once you get into this and like just the depth of the detail and how their stories both line up exactly, there's no way that this could just be a whole fabricated thing. Like, there's too much. And someone else said in the documentary, like, either they're the best actors that they have ever seen. Like, there's no way they can both act that way if it wasn't true, kind of thing. So I don't think there should be any doubt that it's made up.
Yeah, and the brothers never really once really wavered or changed their story. I mean, after the initial story of like we came home and found them dead, obviously once they were arrested and like the trial, like they've never wavered from that story. And then if you have this other person coming out saying that, well, José Menendez sexually assaulted me, it's like, yeah, it kind of is just, and then that with all of the detail from the brothers' testimony, and then the fact that there's this letter or this cousin who says that she knew, like all of that stuff, it can't all be not true. So this cousin's lying, and this other person who says that José Menendez sexually assaulted them. I mean, I guess just because if José Menendez did sexually assault that other person doesn't mean he assaulted his sons as well. But I just feel like, I don't know, there's just too much there, and I don't know. That's, yeah, Katie said, it's not really the debate of whether or not that is truthful. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that it did happen. It's just sort of that debate of whether you think that justifies killing their parents. And I think people may be afraid to say, well, no, I think they should be out of prison, because then it makes it seem like, well, no, you're kind of excusing murder. But I always think of this, or not always, but since learning more about this case and watching this documentary, I always contrast it to the Gypsy Rose case. because that was a very similar thing. Gypsy Rose, for those of you who don't know, she was someone who was being abused by her mother, not in the same way, but I think she was being like controlled and abused and forced to, or said that she had all these medical issues or something like that, and her mother was just being very abusive towards her. And so Gypsy Rose and her boyfriend plotted to kill Gypsy Rose's mother, and they did. And then she was eventually found and arrested and charged, and she spent a long time, like 10 years or something, or a little bit more, than in prison. But she got out in 2024. She was released from prison.
Yeah, I think the interesting part of that is they both committed the murder, and like because he wasn't being abused by her, he is life in prison, like he's never getting out. And she also committed the murder, but because she was abused, she got a lesser sentence, I feel, and so she still went to jail, but now she's out because she was a victim of abuse her whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's interesting that they both got different sentences for doing the same thing because of their situations. And so yeah, I think that is a good example of it could be used in this case too.
Well, I think, and I didn't go down the rabbit hole in Gypsy Rose, so I don't know the exact specifics, but I'm pretty sure from the little I looked up, it's like he physically did the murder. Like she was there and knew it was happening, but she wasn't the one who actually physically did it, I think.
He's one that like pulled the trigger or whatever, but she was there and kind of planned it with him and like let him in the house and everything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are cases where someone that didn't actually commit the murder, but they planned it all, they still go to jail for life, because without them it wouldn't have happened, which is kind of the same without Gypsy Rose, that the murder wouldn't have happened, but yet she still got a lesser sentence. And that probably is because of the abuse, right? Like that was her only way out. Of course it doesn't excuse it, but it's a factor for sure.
Yeah. So what in that case, like, is the difference? Like, I guess the only difference here is that the brothers actually committed the murder. They weren't the ones. They didn't like plan it and have someone else do it. It's like they also did it, whereas Gypsy Rose. But like you said, like it wouldn't have happened without her.
Yeah, and also, but I think because the jurors didn't have another option, it was first degree murder or nothing, and like we were saying, like in the second trial, they just didn't have that option, and so they didn't want to set them free, obviously, so they had to convict them, and that's just the only choice. So I think that has something to do with it as well, because if they did have that choice of, it could just be voluntary manslaughter, then it would be a different outcome, obviously. But yeah.
And I was going to say, do you think, and I think personally, like comparing the two cases as well, do you think that there's any difference in the fact that it was like male victims versus female victims? Because like if Gypsy Rose had been like a son who was being abused in that same way as Gypsy Rose was and plotted with their partner to kill her, would the sentence have been the same? Because whereas the Menendez brothers, it was like the 80s and 90s, they were male victims, and I think like sexual assault against male victims is just typically, I think, under reported or under like not really understood, or it's kind of not given sympathy in the same way that maybe you would like a female victim. So I just also wonder too if the gender of the person.
I don't know if the gender it might have something to do with it, but I also feel that the fact that in Gypsy Rose's case, like the abuse was obvious and like documented, and like she went through like treatments and had surgeries and went through chemo, and she wasn't even sick, like she didn't have cancer, and that they could prove that. Like she was in a wheelchair her whole life because her mother said she couldn't walk, when like she legit could just get out of that wheelchair and walk. And so it was obvious of her abuse, and I think the doubt in the Menendez brothers case, were they actually abused, there's still that doubt, and so it's not as obvious, I guess, that they were abused. Where with Gypsy, it was like totally 100% yes, she was.
That's true. And also I guess it is different between like sexual abuse versus just the physical abuse of Gypsy Rose and like the medical treatments or whatever. I don't know what you would call that, like Munchausen by proxy. Is that what that is?
Munchausen by proxy. Yeah
Whereas like I think just in general, like sexual abuse is underreported. So like, and you can't like, there's a reason that the brothers didn't tell anyone, because there's like a lot of shame in that, right? And there's a lot of stuff that goes with that. So that's also like a lot of people say like, why didn't they tell anyone, or why didn't they leave the situation? I think that person should go and maybe watch some educational documentaries about sexual abuse. I feel like that, it's easy to say from the outside, like, why don't you just leave or whatever? But like Katie, you said earlier, Erik especially was like kind of groomed to like never believe he could actually escape that situation. And his brother was super controlling. His mother was controlling. Like, if you're experiencing that for years and years, like you do feel helpless in that situation, and to preserve your own life, you're not going to leave because they say that if you leave, you're going to kill you. So a lot of stuff there too. So I don't know. I think it's just, but that was the first thing, or one of the first things I thought of was like, because Gypsy Rose did recently get out like a year ago or whatever. So she's out and she's written a book and she's has her own reality show coming out. So, I mean, people have their feel a certain way about that. Like
Yeah, I think that's
she
a bit
killed her
much,
mother and
but
now she has a reality show. Yeah. But I mean, I guess she got to make money somehow. I don't know. Does she have any other skill sets? I don't know. But
She recently
yeah.
had
So
a
whether
baby.
you,
oh, did
she's been out
she?
of jail for like a year.
Yeah, she had a baby. Yeah. It's like
Wasn't she
I don't. I
recently.
married
remember I was
to?
following her because she was all over social media, and it was like how she got married. Like she was like with her ex boyfriend, and they got to like they broke up, and then she was with this new guy. They got married, and then she left him to go back with the other guy, and now she has a baby. And like yeah, it was all over everything. I remember just like following it just because it was interesting. But yeah, I'm like this is too much. Like I feel like she needs to kind of
And her
calm
voice
down
annoys me.
a little bit.
No offense, but
Oh my god.
I can't.
Um,
It's just like, oh no.
but yeah, I don't think she
But
should be
yeah,
like a celebrity status
no,
now because of.
no.
I mean, her story's crazy, and
Yeah.
it's like I feel bad for her and that she went through that, but I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a different episode.
Yeah, I feel like you can like advocate maybe that she should get out of prison, or you agree that maybe she served her time, but there's a difference between that just getting out of prison and leading a normal life versus getting out of prison and then becoming a reality star or getting rich off. I don't know, but whatever. Yeah, like you said, that's another episode. I mean,
Well,
I don't
there's a
see.
show called Life After Lockup on TLC. If anybody's
Yeah,
interested in
I mean
watching that.
TLC is trash. I don't know. I don't. Whatever. If I guess do whatever you can to get money, but I don't know if you have a TLC. I just don't see necessarily the Menendez brothers. I don't think it's first on their list. Like, okay, I'm gonna go and get a TLC show. Like, I don't see that. For the Menendez brothers, I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. Whatever they go, I guess if you want them to, I guess do you think Katie and Steph? Do you think that they? What would your decision be that they should get out of prison after they've been there for 30 years, 35 years? Do you think that they should be let go? I'm assuming it's yes, but
I think they should be let go, but I also feel like they're gonna have a hard time in society because they went to jail what in 1996.
well, no, they were right after the arrest, like 1990.
Oh, 1990. So
For
like
jail.
all that time has gone by and like they haven't stepped foot outside. I feel like if they're going to get released, then they need like they're gonna need like definitely some support because life is not the same as when they went in. But I think they do deserve to get out. I think they've served their time. I think they've they feel bad for what they did. I feel like, and I just feel like they've done their time.
Yeah, I feel like if the abuse against them is true, which I feel like it is, then I think, yeah, they didn't deserve life in prison without parole. So, and 35 years is a hell of a long time. So I think, yeah, I think if they got out, I wouldn't be against it.
Yeah, I agree. Like, you can think that, because there's the argument, yeah, like a lot of people who are assaulted or who are abused don't commit crimes, which is true. So yeah, there probably should be some punishment there, some penalty, but they've served that time. Even if it was a 20-year sentence, I think they served. And they don't strike me as like violent, cold-blooded criminals who are going to like reoffend when they get out. This was a very like targeted, specific situation.
Yeah, and
It's
it's not
just,
like they're troublemakers in prison, right? Like I think it's Lyle that has started like a sexual abuse sort of like support thing in jail, and like a lot of people have come forward, and he's like the mentor to a lot of people that are in jail that went through that and like actually never confessed or never talked about it to anyone. So he is like helping people in jail, and he said like a lot of people reached out to him actually, like people out in the world. Like he said he's gotten letters from police officers and teachers and like just everybody that you could think of has sent him letters saying like I feel for you, I was there. The kind of same thing happened to me. And so yeah, he's like doing good behind bars. It's not like they're, gang leaders and killing people behind bars either. So I think that says it's a huge thing to consider as well.
yeah. And I can't. Also, I had it in my notes, and I have to talk about it. We haven't talked about. We can do it quickly, but I just want to talk about it. What are your thoughts about the prosecutor in this documentary? Because I have my my feelings about her. Like, I just like okay, like I don't know. I
I think she
think
needs to pick
so.
another profession. I did not like her. I'm sorry. I did not like her. I didn't think anything she said. I didn't. I don't know. I just didn't like her.
Well, I mean, I think she's in the right profession because she has lawyer
True.
energy all over her.
Yeah.
So,
I just don't like
I,
her. I don't.
yeah, me
She
neither.
was meh to me.
Oh yeah, the prosecutor. So the one who was like, "Oh, by the way, I have got this house is armed. Like, don't mess with me."
Like, shut
um,
up. Like, I don't
oh
know.
my god.
Whatever.
Yeah, honestly, because she's not one of those people that I feel we talked about this before, where like she feels it like personally against her if you don't agree with like what's going on. If they get out of jail, then it's like personally against her that she didn't do her job well or something. You know what I mean? Like I feel like she has that kind of energy, which we've seen before. People that refuse to admit that they were wrong or refuse to like admit that they could go a different way than what they originally went. And I think that's kind of her energy. So I mean, it's whatever. I don't feel anything for her either way. Whatever.
Yeah, she said that she said she didn't lose the case because she was the prosecutor in the first trial, the one that was the hung jury. She's like, well, I didn't lose, but I also didn't win. So then when they did get prosecuted for the second trial, she probably felt like jealous that it wasn't her that did it. I don't know, just like ego.
Well, yeah, but I don't think she'd want them to get out because she'd personally feel as if, you know, she was being wronged because
Yeah.
that's not her opinion. She fought for them to go to jail, and if they get out, then it's something
Yeah.
personal against her. That's the kind of energy she gives me, which is super annoying. But anyway, yeah, she definitely fits
Yeah.
that profession. At least she's convinced. At least she does her job and like is convinced, and that's why she's so good at it because she feels that they're guilty and deserve to go to jail forever, rather than someone that doesn't agree with what they're doing and kind of half-assing it. So yeah, I mean, I guess at least she has her opinion and sticks with it.
I guess. But like to me, it's like if she had even like because she can sit there and if she had said something along the lines of like, I believe, at I was doing the right thing at the time. Like I still stand behind the fact that they killed these people and should have gone to jail. But if she had even said like, however, if what that is true, I feel horrible for what they had to endure, but I still think they should have gone to or it's just something that shows like an ounce of sort of empathy. I don't know, but I guess she doesn't believe that it even happened, probably, so she
Yeah, I
doesn't
don't think she
feel
believes
like
them
she
at
has to
all.
do that.
So yeah.
But like, but even if she could say, "I don't believe it," however, if it's true, then I feel this way. I don't know, just to show some type of that you're a compassionate person. Like to me, she just seemed very like she had something personal against them. Like I don't know, like you were saying, or like just cold. I don't know. Maybe that makes her a good prosecutor, but like to me, if she could even say like, "Oh, 30 years ago or 35 years ago, I didn't, we didn't have an understanding of like sex abuse at the time or whatever that we do now," and I don't know, just some acknowledgement of the fact that
Well, yeah,
maybe.
I didn't get the vibe
Yeah.
that she would have said that, but also you have to remember that like probably everything she's said is not in that documentary. They could have cut parts out. She could have said something like that, and they just never put it in there because it like looks better if she didn't or something. So,
Yeah,
but she didn't give off
yeah,
that vibe where she was forgiving at all. But she could have been. They just didn't put it
yeah.
in.
That's true. I mean, they chose. You choose every clip carefully. I mean, they chose to put in the part of her at the end, like, I have guns, I'm armed. Like, that doesn't show her in the best light. And they chose to put that in there. So I guess they probably had their own feelings about her, probably to portray her in a certain way. So maybe in all the cut footage, she showed her empathetic sides. Probably not, but
Yeah, and
maybe.
another thing that I was thinking about as I was watching this too, what you could tell was very like a lot of it felt very one-sided towards that they were innocent, even though it did show them like spending all that money after their parents were killed and buying cars and Rolexes and stuff. Everything else was kind of very much on their side, and because I remember somebody in the documentary saying, "Oh, these brothers are just like arrogant rich kids that just wanted some money." But like I did the shows like the court footage, they don't seem like they're like arrogant and I'm like I'm better than you kind of person. So, but there must have been something that went on that made other people feel like that. So, and they didn't really show that. So, I mean, you don't really know what their demeanor is in real life. You just kind of saw what they were like during the trial. So, there's that to think about as well.
Yeah, that's true. And like we always talk about when we talk about documentaries, they're always going to be from a certain bias or perspective. So if you watch one from the other perspective, I guess that fictionalized version, that they probably believe they're horrible people, and that's why they chose to portray them in that fictional version like that.
Yeah, that fictional version, it makes them look like they are like these pompous, like super arrogant, shitty people. But yeah, that's not
and
the
like
vibe you get from this one.
I read something like they asked Ryan Murphy, who like created that fictional version, about what he thought about like the backlash or whatever, and he didn't really seem that empathetic, or was just kind of like, we did our research and this is what we wanted, the story we wanted to tell based on the research we did. So I mean, there must be research or evidence out there that does have them in that light. That just wasn't shown in this documentary. But
no, he definitely like took some artistic liberties or whatever you want to call it, and like expanded on things that definitely just weren't there, or like exaggerated situations. Like I'm not even gonna go into them, but like yes, just some like disgusting things that they never saw anywhere else.
Yeah, wasn't there like incestuous relationship implied in that fictional version?
Yeah, it said that it's implied that like the brothers like showered together and like loved each other that way, and like they were doing to each other what their father was doing to them because they wanted to do that to each other, like that kind of thing, which there's no evidence of at all. So it's like that kind of thing.
But wasn't there was testimony in the trial though, that didn't they say that like he did?
Okay, yeah, there was when
Something like
Lyle
that.
was like 7, after his father had done that to him, he then did that to Erik when they were like little kids, like once or something out in the woods. But this documentary implied that as they were teenagers, like 16, 17, 18, that they did that together. Like they would shower together when they were teenagers and young adults. So that's not true.
I don't understand like how could you not be sued for that? Like, isn't that slander, like defamation? I mean, I guess it's fictional if you're presenting it as a fictional version of events.
I know. I was
But
thinking about that. Like, where's the line of like, yeah, this happened, but this didn't? I guess you're just, I don't know. I guess you can get away with it just by just saying it's fictional.
Why put that in there though? Like, what's the point of having that extra disgusting
I know.
part
I don't. I don't know.
of the fictional thing to begin with? That's not real. Why put that in there?
yeah, how does that feed into like whatever story they were trying to tell? How does that change? Like, what was the point of the show? What was the story they were trying to tell? That these brothers
I never
were just
watched
lovers?
it. Like I
don't
might
get
watch
it.
it now just because of this like I've never watched that version. I don't know if I really want to. It seems kind of a weird thing, but yeah, why put that? Why
But, like,
put that stuff in
yeah,
there?
like what does
I
like portraying them as lovers change about the story, about what happened, the events? Like, to me, that's just like sensationalized. I don't know, to cause controversy so that people talk about it. Like, to me, it just seems completely like, I don't know, like selling out to just.
Is he known for that?
Well, Ryan Murphy, he also created he did the People versus O.J. Simpson. Like, they did one on O.J. Simpson. It wasn't like, I did watch that one. It wasn't like that. Like, it was more, I think, closer to the facts, but I mean, the families still weren't happy about the portrayal of it. And then I think he also, it's Monsters, which is like, didn't they do one for Jeffrey Dahmer? Like, there was another season before this about Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
It's the same creator. So I don't know. Whatever.
That's good too.
Whatever
I watched that. I don't. And again, I see now. I don't know what's true about Jeffrey Dahmer because after I watched that. But anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, for what it's worth, going back to like the real story. So for whatever it's worth, like so Kitty Menendez is like, so the mother who was murdered, her sister wants the brothers out of jail. Like, they interviewed her. There's an article by the BBC talking about the resentencing potential, and she says that she wants them to come home. So like, if her own sister is saying that, but then also I think they say that then Kitty's brother thinks that they're just cold-blooded killers. So there was like division within the family too. But so I guess the debate lives within the family itself in some capacity, not just.
Yeah, again, it's like the woman in the family that has empathy. I feel like it's always, not always, but more so, it's like the women that feel that empathy. Like the first jury, it was all women that thought they shouldn't be first-degree murder, and that's how it was like split, which is interesting. But anyway, yeah.
So overall, like, if you're listening to this on the release date on the 29th of January, then we'll get some updates tomorrow or the 31st about this, unless they're postponed again, which is possible. They were already postponed once, and I don't know how, like, considering that it's going to be happening in LA County, and right now at the time of this recording the wildfires are happening in LA. I don't really know if that might impact, it might get pushed back. I don't know how much that will impact, but there is going to be, as of right now, a hearing or a decision based on the resentencing on the 30th and 31st of January. We'll update you once we get news of that, like whether it's postponed or whether it's actually does happen and what the results of that are. So it's going to be in the news continuously, and there's going to be hopefully a lot of updates as they progress. If they do get a resentencing, like what's that's going to mean for their release and what's that going to mean for all the proceedings and stuff. So definitely we'll keep you updated on that. But overall, just a sad situation, however you think about it. There was 2 people that were murdered, and even if they were not great people and they were pretty heinous people, there's still 2 murders that happened. It's just kind of sad either way. So yeah, we talked. This is a longer episode than I thought it was going to be, but lots of stuff to talk about. But yeah, very, very interesting case overall. So we hope you enjoyed listening to our discussion, our opinions about the case, and we hope that you'll engage with us and tell us what you think about the case. Do you think they should get resentenced? Do you think they should remain in prison? What are your thoughts about the case, the documentary, all of that stuff? We'll put the link to the documentary below, and all of that stuff as well. So, and yeah, thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with a brand new discussion, a new case, and a whole new episode. So thank you so much. Have a great week, and until next time, take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.